All right, let's get to it. Chapter 33, exercise 145. This is again on page 236. So, eroteso tus andros e eblabesan ten kephalein. So I, because we have the personal ending here, and then erotao, verb that we know. But then what tense is this? Well, with the sigma and the omega here, we've got a couple options. Really, let's look at our principal parts. Because the principal parts for erotao are actually a little bit more complex than normal. So we have erotao, let's give that one. This is a good little excuse to take a moment. And then we have our second principal part, eroteso, which you might be saying, well, Al, we just solved it. It's obviously future here. Well, wait just a second. We could have aeromain, which is one of these deponent aorist, or also erotesa. So you say, well, that doesn't really look quite like this, Al, but you would say, all right, so this is aorist, this is our third principal part, and these are all indicative, right? So we do have an augment here, so if we were to remove the augment, we'd be left with this. And then if we wanted to put on the first person, say, subjunctive, the subjunctive would have no augment, so our subjunctive of the aorist is going to be identical in the first person singular to our future. So we don't know what this is going to be. If this were subjunctive, maybe we'd be thinking this is deliberative, right? And if it were deliberative, because it's first person, should I ask, we'd be expecting a question mark at the end. We don't have that. So we can safely assume, at least for the purposes of this, that we're not dealing with the subjunctive aorist, but simply the future indicative. I think that's a safe bet. But it's nice to point out that there could be some ambiguity. How could the Greeks deal with this? Well, the Greeks could deal with, we deal with ambiguity all the time in English, and we're used to it because context tells you everything you know. Most of your engagement with the English language is not in short sentences completely taken out of context. So you would know wherever you were to see this. So I will ask, that's the translation that we're going to take for this, the men, if. Again, this is easy, right? This is how it should be because the Greek is a lot like the English. So I will ask the men if they, because again we can see this plural aorist ending, eblabesan. Well, what form is that? So we might think, oh, well, it's coming, we have this, what looks like an aorist active ending, right? So you might think, yes, from the third principal part, blah, eblab, and then tag that on and you would be there. But no, because that's not blab at all, right? Because the third principal part of blopto is eblapsa, I harmed. So this isn't coming from the third principal part, but it is indeed aorist. This is, of course, our sixth principal part. So this is going to be aorist passive, if they were harmed. And then, since this is passive, what do we do with this accusative? Because we're so used to taking these as direct objects, but passive verbs can't have direct objects. The best that they can have would be a hupo plus a genitive of agent. So we don't have that. What is an accusative that's not a direct object doing? Well, normally that's an accusative of respect, and that's exactly what's going on here. Whether they were harmed literally with respect to, but we might just say in the head. So were you guys hurt in the head? Maybe this is an insult, right? Because they were behaving foolishly. I will ask them then if they were smacked upside the head. But really what we just have is harmed with respect to the head. Aorist passive, accusative of respect. Fairly tricky, but that's all kind of secondary to what we're learning in this lesson, which is the indirect question, and that actually was pretty easy. Indicative throughout, no problems there. Ebulametha mathain poteron hoi persai menusin I have no idea what happened. This should be apo kore susi. So we lost a line and we lost an omicron there. So apo kore susin. So we deliberated, right? Because we've got bulomai here. Well, that's not deliberate. What is bulomai? Well, that's want. So then what tense do we have here? The imperfect. And that makes sense because we want, wanting tends to be a progressive thing rather than aorist. So we were wanting, or simply we wanted to learn mathane. And what form of this? That's the aorist infinitive, right? Because manfanein would be the present active. So we wanted to learn whether, that's the word for poteron, the Persians, menusin. So what tense is that? Well, we know meno to remain, but then if we just tagged on the third person plural ending, we'd have menusin right there with the accent still on the epsilon. What's causing this to be an epsilon contract is the fact that we're actually in the future, right? Which is meno, or more technically, meneo, right? So that's what we have meneusi here, and that's what's triggering the circumflex. So this is actually a future form. So we have to follow our sequence of tenses in English. We wanted in the past to know whether the whether the Persians would in the relative future, and in English we do that with the helping word would. Whether the Persians would remain, would stay, or, and then here we have apokore susen, again a future tense verb, or depart, or leave, go away. So you could repeat the whether they would do this, or whether they would depart, but we don't need to do that. Whether they would remain or depart. That's simple. That'll take care of it. Finally, number 10. Hoi politai eronto tines esmen kai pothen elphamen. So the citizens. And now what tense is this? Because it is indeed from erotao, but note that we just above had two different third principal parts for this verb. We had a middle form, right, which was a raw main, and then we had a kind of more standard weak aorist part, erotesa, that was active. So it is this middle deponent because look, we have a passive or middle passive ending here that we're looking at. So what we actually have here is an aorist middle, because since it is aorist, it can't be passive with that ending. So we know, okay, it's working with one of these two possible aorist principal parts. And it is the more common, the deponent is the more common principal part. So the citizens asked, that's all that is, asked who? Esmen, we are. But because they asked in the past, again, this is going to be relative time. So they asked at that time who we were, and pothen, what did that word mean? That meant whence in our kind of Victorian English translation, but that simply means from where. And from where we came. Good questions. So the citizens asked who we were and from where we came. Indirect questions. Again, all this actually has been pretty easy. We've run into some interesting things, not to mention typos, but we have epsilon contracts, futures, we had deponent, aorist, we had a verb form that could go either aorist subjunctive, but a uncommon form of the aorist, or future indicative. And then last but not least, we had this accusative of respect and aorist passive form. But really, the questions were almost secondary. Those were pretty easy. Let's hope that that continues to be the same when we move into exercise 146 in the next lesson. See you then.